Margaret Elwood adjusted her rose-colored cardigan and glanced nervously at the departures board at LAX. It was 9:15 a.m., and her son Daniel had told her they'd be back in just a few minutes. "Just sit tight in the lounge, Mom," he had said, his voice clipped and overly patient, the kind he used when talking to telemarketers or elderly relatives he didn't quite know what to do with. The airport lounge wasn't glamorous. She sat between a dusty rubber plant and a toddler who hadn't stopped crying since she arrived. A television above her blinked erratically with a weather report from Denver. She had packed 3 days ago, every outfit folded with care, just as she used to do for Daniel's summer camps when he was little. This was supposed to be their big family trip to Maui, as Jennifer, her daughter-in-law, had excitedly labeled it. Matching t-shirts for everyone had been made. Margaret's read "Vacation Nana" in bright pink letters. She hadn't liked it, but she wore it. At the security line, something had started to feel off. Jennifer kept checking her watch. Daniel was quiet, distant. Even the grandkids, teenagers now, barely looked up from their phones. When the TSA officer asked about their seats, Jennifer laughed and waved it off. "We'll sort that later," she said. No one made eye contact with Margaret after that. Once through security, Jennifer turned to her and smiled that tight, brittle smile Margaret had come to dread. "Why don't you wait in the lounge, Mom? We'll go check in the bags, get the boarding passes sorted, and come get you. You deserve to rest. You've done so much." She patted Margaret's arm. It wasn't affection, it was dismissal. So she waited. 1 hour passed, then another. She got up and paced. By the 3rd hour, she asked the front desk to page Daniel. No response. By the 5th, the clerk hesitated when she gave Daniel's full name and checked the manifest. "They boarded the 1:45 p.m. flight to Kahului, ma'am. That flight departed 2 hours ago." Margaret didn't cry. She didn't shout. She walked to the restroom, locked herself in a stall, and just sat. Not to cry, she had no tears left. Just to be somewhere no one would ask if she was okay. At 5:45 p.m., the airport began to shift into its evening rhythm. Margaret walked to the departures screen. Portland. 7:35 p.m. One way. Why Portland? Maybe because it was where she and her late husband had honeymooned. Maybe because it wasn't Maui. She bought the ticket using a card Daniel didn't know about, one she had kept open for emergencies. This counted. No one texted, no missed calls. She took off the Vacation Nana shirt and shoved it in the trash. On the plane, she watched the lights fade away beneath her. 8 hours ago, she was going to paradise. Now she was heading somewhere real, somewhere they couldn't follow. Portland was wet, quiet, unfamiliar, but not unkind. She booked a room in a roadside motel, the kind with key cards and windows facing the parking lot. She had packed sensibly. Enough clothes, medications, cash. Her leather carry-on was old but sturdy. Daniel once mocked it. It had been a 25th anniversary gift from her late husband, Calvin. He would have laughed if he knew what had happened that day. A warm, knowing laugh. The next morning, Margaret made coffee in the tiny machine in her motel room and sat by the window. She had nowhere to be. The strangeness of that thought startled her. For over 40 years, her time had belonged to someone else. Not today. She walked the neighborhood. Her hips protested. Her knees whispered complaints. She ignored them. She found a bakery and bought a scone with exact change. "You new around here?" the young woman at the counter asked. "I used to be," Margaret replied. The woman smiled. "Well, welcome back." The words were warm, and they stayed with her. She scanned a nearby bulletin board. Dog walking, rooms for rent. One caught her eye. Quiet lady wanted. No drama. $400 month. Call Hazel. Something about the handwriting made her believe the offer was real. She took a photo of the number. By noon, she had called. Hazel answered with a voice that sounded like whiskey and old jazz. "You clean?" Hazel asked. "No boyfriends?" "Not in years," Margaret said. "Come by at 4. Bring first week's rent." Hazel's house was faded blue with peeling paint. There were wind chimes and a cat in the window. Margaret knocked. Hazel squinted through the door. You, the old one? I suppose I am. Come in. Let's see if we can stand each other. And just like that, a new life began. Hazel's home smelled like onions, lavender, and something slightly burnt but comforting. The entryway was cluttered with stacked newspapers, framed cross-stitch quotes, and a calico cat named Margot who eyed Margaret like a customs officer. The room she was shown was upstairs, small, with a slanted ceiling and one wide window that let in golden afternoon light. This is it, Hazel said, her cigarette hand pointing toward the twin bed. Shared kitchen, bathrooms down the hall. No guests unless I say so. You cause trouble, you're out. Understood? Crystal, Margaret replied. She handed over 4 crisp $100 bills from an envelope tucked in her coat. Hazel didn't count them, just nodded and handed over a key with a crocheted fob. You hungry? Margaret hadn't eaten since a sandwich at the airport the day before. I could eat. Hazel made grilled cheese and tomato soup. They sat at a small round table beneath a humming ceiling fan. Margaret didn't speak much, and Hazel didn't ask. The silence was not awkward. It was earned. That night, Margaret unpacked her belongings into the worn dresser. 3 outfits, a paperback mystery novel, a bottle of aspirin, and a framed photo of Calvin on their wedding day. She placed it on the nightstand like a ritual. Before turning out the light, she stood at the window and watched headlights paint the walls. She wasn't anyone's burden here. She was just Margaret. The next morning, she brewed coffee in a chipped ceramic pot and sat on the front porch with Margot the cat curled beside her. Hazel grunted as she passed in her bathrobe. You sleep all right? Best in weeks, Margaret answered truthfully. She found herself walking more each day. Into neighborhoods with bookshops and old record stores, past chain-link fences covered in vines. She bought a crossword book from a corner drugstore. At a small cafe with mismatched mugs, she left a tip with her last $3 and didn't feel small. In her notebook, she wrote one sentence. I was forgotten, but not finished. The rhythm of Portland mornings was different, slower, gentler, wrapped in mist and the scent of pine. Margaret awoke in her small rented room to the sound of rain tapping lightly against the wide-paneled window. Margot the cat had claimed the foot of her bed overnight, and now blinked lazily at her as she sat up. There was something liberating about not being needed. No one expected breakfast. No calendar packed with errands. She boiled water on the stovetop for coffee, listening to Hazel humming a 60s jazz tune from another room. The quiet was a gift. By the 3rd day, she had established a small routine coffee on the porch, a brisk walk to the neighborhood market for something fresh, and a stop at the public library. The librarian, a woman with silver dreadlocks named Lenora, handed her a free events pamphlet without being asked. You new here? She asked, echoing the barista's question from days ago. Starting over, Margaret said. It had become her answer of choice. She lingered in the biographies aisle. Women who had reinvented themselves. Politicians. Artists. Homemakers turned explorers. There was something quietly thrilling about reading the lives of women who took back their time. At the checkout desk, Lenora slipped a note in her bag. Book club meets Fridays at 10. That Friday, Margaret went. Not because she particularly wanted to talk, but because she wanted to listen. She found the group in a circle of old armchairs on the 2nd floor of the library, women of all shapes and shades. The discussion centered on a novel about a woman who faked her death and started over in Alaska. I don't know, said one woman, clutching her thermos. Is it really starting over if you don't face the people you left? Margaret said nothing but felt something stir in her chest. Hazel asked her that night, You always so quiet? Not always, Margaret said. I just don't like wasting words. Hazel chuckled, nodding with approval. You'll fit in just fine here. On Saturday, she stumbled into a cafe tucked beside a hardware store. The place smelled like burnt toast and cinnamon. She ordered a plain black coffee, and was halfway through sipping when the barista woman no older than 30 with a nose ring and a tattoo of a whisk on her forearm approached her. "We're looking for weekday help. Early shifts. You interested?" Margaret blinked. "Do I look like I can handle that?" "You look like you've done harder things than serve coffee," the barista replied. Something about the directness appealed to Margaret. "I'll think about it." She returned the next day and filled out an application. Her first shift was a blur of mugs, orders, and aching feet. The cafe owner, a stocky woman named Yvonne, didn't offer much praise but handed her a clean apron after the morning rush and said, "Not bad. Come back tomorrow." Margaret was surprised by how much she liked it. There was structure. Purpose. She liked remembering how people took their coffee. The regulars began to recognize her. A retired nurse named Ellie who always sat by the window. A young woman with a toddler who left $2 in tips no matter what. By the end of her second week, she was earning enough for groceries and saving a little in an envelope she kept under her pillow. Not because she didn't trust banks, but because it felt more tangible. Hazel noticed the change in her routine. "You're walking different," she said one night over spaghetti. "Lighter. Maybe I am." A letter arrived the following Tuesday. No return address. But the handwriting was unmistakable. "Daniel." Margaret didn't open it right away. She held it in her hand, turning it over and over. Finally, she slit the envelope open with a butter knife. The contents were predictably disappointing. A single page. Accusations masked as concern. "We thought you were behind us." The kids were confused. Jennifer cried. Nothing about the lounge. Nothing about the 8 hours. Nothing real. She folded it up and burned it in the kitchen sink. Hazel walked in halfway through and said, "You gonna need a new pot if you keep cremating memories in it." They both laughed. Sunday afternoon, Margaret visited the second-hand store on Ash and Bell. She found a navy coat, soft and warm with deep pockets. It cost $18 and made her feel like someone going somewhere important. At home, she modeled it in the mirror, then wore it out for no reason other than the satisfaction of doing so. At the bus stop, she shared a bench with a man in a peacoat reading a newspaper. He nodded politely. She returned the nod. It was the kind of simple moment that reminded her she was still part of the world. Another week passed. The envelope under her pillow grew fatter. She used part of it to buy ingredients for a cake. Hazel's birthday was coming up. Chocolate with raspberry jam. Hazel pretended to grumble about the fuss, but cleaned her plate twice. "You keep cooking like this, I might let you stay past winter," Hazel joked. Margaret smiled. "You're not rid of me yet." Friday, just before closing, the bell over the cafe door jingled and a boy walked in. 19, maybe 20. Tall, thin, with his mother's nervous eyes. He walked straight up to the counter. "Grandma," he said. Margaret's hand stopped mid-wipe. "Kieran?" He nodded. "I found your address." Sort of. She stepped out from behind the counter and hugged him before she could think. "I'm not here to drag you back," he said into her shoulder. "I just wanted to make sure you were okay." They sat in the back booth and talked until Yvonne flicked the lights. Kieran asked questions but never pressed. He told her he missed her banana bread. She promised to mail him the recipe. As he left, he turned to her. "You look happy." "I think I am." That night, she sat by the window in her rented room. Margot nestled beside her. Rain pattered against the glass. She thought about writing a letter. To Daniel. To Jennifer. But decided not to. She was building something here. Something hers. And it was only just beginning. Margaret awoke earlier than usual, the sounds of Hazel shuffling through the hallway coaxing her out of sleep. Margot the cat had curled up beside her again, loyal in that standoffish feline way. She stretched, the stiff ache in her joints duller than usual. There was something steadying about having somewhere to be even if it was just the cafe. Even if it meant stained aprons and tired feet. Her days were predictable now. but that predictability had become comfort. She wasn't invisible in this new life. At the cafe, customers called her by name. Hazel left notes on the fridge. Out of eggs, buy if you want omelets. It wasn't family, but it was something like home. She had started a new journal, the kind with thick paper and a leather cover that reminded her of the one she kept in college. The first entry was only 4 words. I am still here. At the public library, she bumped into Lenora again. The librarian asked if she might consider volunteering a few afternoons, helping with cataloging or reading sessions for kids. Margaret said yes without hesitation. The last time she'd read to a child was years ago, when Kieran was still small and wanted the same bedtime story 4 nights in a row. The next week, she was handed a schedule. Storytime Mondays at 3. She chose a stack of classics: Charlotte's Web, The Velveteen Rabbit. Harold and the Purple Crayon and practiced reading aloud alone in her room. The first session had only 3 children and 1 sleepy toddler who wandered off halfway through. But Margaret's voice held steady. And when one girl asked if she could read again next week, Margaret felt something shift inside her. A remembered sense of worth. Hazel had never been nosy, but she was observant. You're humming, she said one evening as they dried dishes together. I didn't realize. You never used to, Margaret shrugged. Maybe I forgot how. Hazel handed her a clean plate. Glad you remembered. They shared quiet dinners, unspoken routines. On Thursdays, Hazel made stew. On Sundays, Margaret baked scones. When Hazel had a cold, Margaret left a cup of lemon tea and tissues outside her door. Sometimes, when Hazel was out, Margaret would sit in the kitchen and watch the light shift across the cabinets. It reminded her of Calvin Howe. He would sit beside her in silence and say nothing because nothing needed saying. She still missed him, but it didn't hurt the same way. On her 3rd Saturday morning shift, a customer lingered longer than usual. An older man, well-dressed, with kind eyes and a blue scarf. He ordered black coffee and toast and read the paper front to back. Nice coat, he said as Margaret refilled his mug. Thank you. It's second-hand. Best things usually are. He came back the following Saturday. And the next. Margaret learned his name was Arthur. Widowed, retired school principal, liked crossword puzzles and hiking trails he could still manage. He never pried, only asked questions that left room to decline. She found herself answering anyway. They talked about birds, they talked about poetry. He brought her a dog-eared copy of Mary Oliver's work and said, "Read that one, The Journey. Made me think of you." She read it that night and cried for the first time in weeks, not out of grief, out of recognition. The next letter came on a Tuesday. The handwriting was different, sharper, colder. Jennifer. Margaret read it slowly. It was more of the same, guilt wrapped in passive aggression. We're worried. The kids are asking questions. Daniel's been sick with stress. And then the kicker. Please be reasonable, we just want to talk. Margaret folded the letter and placed it in a drawer beside her socks. She didn't burn it this time. Some things didn't deserve fire. Some things deserved forgetting. She called Kieran that night. His voice was warm, hesitant, hopeful. I got your letter, he said. It meant a lot. They talked for 20 minutes. He told her about his new job at a bookstore. She told him about Hazel's stew. It wasn't a grand conversation, but it was real. When she hung up, she whispered to the empty room. Thank you. Hazel surprised her on a Friday with a flyer. There's a community potluck next week, she said. You should come. You're going? Free food and town gossip? Of course I'm going. Margaret hesitated. I haven't been to one of those in years. Then it's about time. They spent Saturday baking. Hazel's famous corn pudding. Margaret's lemon squares. They borrowed a folding table from a neighbor and walked to the church basement where the event was held. The room smelled of chili, candle wax, and pine cleaner. Margaret felt awkward at first, standing beside the punch bowl, unsure of where to look. But soon, Someone asked about her lemon squares. Another complimented her coat. By the end of the night, she was laughing with a group of retired teachers about the horrors of standardized testing. She hadn't realized how much she missed laughter shared. That night, sitting on Hazel's porch with Margot asleep in her lap, Margaret took out her journal. She wrote, "I thought I needed to disappear. But I needed to arrive. And I have." The sun was still hiding behind the clouds when Margaret unlocked the cafe at 5:45 a.m. The key stuck a little, as it always did. But she had learned to jiggle it just right. The neon open sign flickered to life as she stepped inside and flipped on the lights. The warmth of the familiar space wrapped around her like an old sweater. Counters, coffee beans, and a day that hadn't yet begun all belonged to her now in some small but certain way. She tied her apron carefully. Deep green with coffee stains that never fully came out. She brewed the first pot, humming softly. A tune from her childhood that had no words. The radio played some low jazz that Yvonne had left on the night before. By 6:30, the regulars began to trickle in. Contractors, nurses just off their night shifts. A yoga teacher with her earbuds always in. Margaret knew their orders by heart now. She greeted them by name, slid mugs across the counter without needing to be asked. It was a rhythm. Not glamorous, not celebrated, but hers. One morning, a younger barista named Ruby came in late, breathless and apologetic. Margaret covered for her without complaint. After the shift, Ruby offered her a scone wrapped in parchment paper. "You didn't have to do that," Ruby said. Margaret smiled. "Neither did you." The gesture stayed with her. So much of her old life had been about being useful an extension of others' needs. Here, every kindness felt like a gift, not a transaction. Arthur continued his Saturday visits. Sometimes he brought the crossword from the Tribune. Sometimes just conversation. Margaret looked forward to their quiet exchanges, the way he asked about her week without pressing, the way he listened as if her words mattered. One morning, he brought her a small magnet shaped like a birdhouse. "Saw it and thought of you," he said casually. She stuck it on the cafe's fridge where only she would see it. Just a little token. But it meant something. Hazel noticed. "You're glowing," she said over dinner. "Am I?" Hazel stabbed a meatball with her fork. "Old lady in love. I've seen it before." Margaret chuckled. "It's not like that. Maybe not yet." Another letter came. This time, it was from Daniel. Longer. Angrier. It accused her of drama, of abandoning the family, of making them look bad. She read it once and set it aside. Arthur found her wiping down the back table slower than usual. "Something wrong?" he asked. "Just a letter," she said. "From the ones who left you behind?" She nodded. He paused, then added gently, "Sometimes family's just who shows up." She didn't reply, but she carried those words with her. A week later, a reporter showed up. "Are you Margaret Elwood?" he asked, notepad in hand. "I'm writing a piece for the Wilmington Gazette. Your son reached out about your disappearance." Margaret wiped her hands on her apron. "I'm not missing," she said calmly. "I left." The article came out days later. Her photo from years ago. The word vulnerable in bold type. Hazel slapped the paper on the kitchen table. "They make you sound like a runaway grandma with dementia." Margaret just laughed. "Let them think that. Keeps them busy." She sent one short letter to Kieran, a proper one this time, on thick cream stationery. It said only, "I'm safe. I'm steady. You were never the problem." He replied a week later with a Polaroid of them in her garden years ago. "I remember," the note said. "I always remembered." She cried again, quietly this time, and kept the photo in her journal. Yvonne pulled her aside after a busy shift. "Saturday brunch shift is hell. You want it?" "Sure," Margaret replied before thinking. It was brutal. Endless coffee refills. Pancake batter everywhere. A baby screamed through most of it. By the end, her feet were swollen, her back ached, and she had sweat in places she'd forgotten could sweat. But it felt good, like she was earning something real. Arthur didn't show that Saturday. He usually avoided weekends. But as Margaret stepped outside to dump trash in the alley, she found him standing by the window, cane in hand. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded. "Just checking in." "You don't drink coffee on Saturdays." "I do when I worry." She stepped closer. "Don't worry. I'm stronger than I look." He smiled. "I know." That night, Hazel brought home Chinese takeout, and they ate it on the porch while Margot hunted moths under the porch light. Hazel passed Margaret a fortune cookie. She cracked it open. The fortune read, "Your strength will surprise even you." She pinned it to the corkboard in her room. The next morning, she wrote in her journal, "I'm not healing anymore. I'm whole. No one gets to name me but me." It started with a voicemail. Margaret turned on her phone for the first time in nearly a month. The battery groaned to life, followed by a flood of notifications. 32 missed calls. 18 messages. The oldest one dated back to the morning after she left the airport. The first voice she heard was Jennifer's, shrill with faux concern. "We thought you were just using the restroom. Please call us. We're boarding." Then Daniel. "Mom, where the hell are you? This isn't funny." By the fourth message, he was angrier. "Fine. Do what you want. But this is selfish." Margaret listened to every message, then deleted them all. Except one. Kieran's last daughter. "Hey, Grandma. I hope you're okay. Everyone's freaking out, but I just want to know you're safe. You don't have to call back if you don't want. Just know I miss you." Her hand hovered over the screen. And then she hit save. That evening, she walked through the old part of town, past shuttered bookstores and tiny art galleries. The wind was cold, but not cruel. She wore her navy coat and felt like a ghost that had finally found its body. The post office was nearly empty. She stood in line behind a woman mailing holiday cards in July. When it was her turn, she bought a single stamp. A bird. A finch. That night, she wrote a letter to Jennifer. Just 3 lines. "I know what you did. I know what you didn't say. I'm not angry. I'm not coming back." She sealed it, pressed the stamp on with care, and left it on Hazel's hallway table for the morning post. Hazel never asked about the letters, but she noticed the shift. "You're sleeping easier," she said one morning while slicing apples. "I am. Good." "You were grinding your teeth like a lumberjack." Margaret laughed. It felt strange and satisfying. Arthur started using a cane. "Old bones," he grumbled. Summer deepened. The days lingered longer, and the evenings stretched into a kind of golden stillness. Margaret had started taking evening walks after dinner, winding through quiet streets lit with porch lights and the flicker of television sets behind half-closed blinds. She no longer feared the sight of her own shadow. Hazel had turned 70. Margaret had baked a chocolate cake, her first from scratch in years, and topped it with strawberries. They ate it on the porch in mismatched bowls. Margot sprawled out across Hazel's lap, basking in the fan's breeze. "You ever think you'd be doing this?" Hazel asked, sipping wine from a coffee mug. "Not in a million years." "You look smug." "I feel smug." They toasted to that. The cafe was busier now. Margaret worked more shifts. Ruby, the younger barista, had taken to calling her boss lady and texting her memes about over-caffeinated customers. Margaret didn't understand half of them, but they made her laugh anyway. Arthur's visits were more regular now. Monday, Wednesday, Saturday. He brought newspapers and sometimes tangerines. He never stayed too long, but always just long enough. They sat on the bench outside the cafe once, watching people pass. "You think you'll ever call them?" he asked. "I don't need to," she said. "They know I'm gone now. That's not the same as knowing where you went." She smiled. "I went somewhere quiet. Somewhere I chose." Arthur tapped his cane. "That's a good place to be." One rainy morning, a letter arrived. No return address. But the handwriting was familiar. Kieran, Grandma, I'm coming to Portland. I want to see you. No one else is coming. I promise. I'll be at the Red Fern Motel, room 12, Friday and Saturday. If you don't come, I'll understand. She stared at the note for a long time, then tucked it into her journal. That Friday, she wore her navy coat and a clean blouse. Lipstick. Deep and red. She didn't tell Hazel where she was going. She didn't need permission anymore. The Red Fern was a tired motel with a buzzing sign and a gravel parking lot. She knocked on room 12 once. The door opened almost instantly. Hey, Grandma. Hi, sweetheart. They didn't hug right away. They just looked at each other, then sat on the edge of the bed like they had all the time in the world. You look different, he said. I am. He nodded. You're happier. I'm realer. They talked about books, about work, about freedom, about silence, about noise. He told her she had always been his favorite. She told him he had always been enough. They didn't cry, but they did breathe deeper. When she left, he handed her a small parcel. Inside, a book of poetry. Underlined verses. One line circled. There are women who rise not from fire, but from forgetting who told them they couldn't. She held it like sacred text. Hazel was on the porch when Margaret returned. Margot at her feet, a blanket across her lap. You look smug again. I saw someone who still sees me. Keep them. I intend to. The last letter came from Daniel. Another envelope. This one thinner but still weighty. Margaret didn't open it. She walked to the park, sat by the duck pond, and fed the unopened envelope to the trash bin. Some things didn't need to be read to be understood. That night, she wrote in her journal, I am not an afterthought. I am not a ghost. I am not a role to be filled. I am the story. I am the ink. I am the hand holding the pen. The potluck at the community center was louder than usual. Margaret brought sweet potato cake, the one Calvin used to call magic. Hazel claimed it was hers. No one questioned her. Arthur wore a shirt with buttons for once. Ruby stopped by after her own shift. Mascara smudged, but smiling. Yvonne dropped off paper cups and stayed for dessert. Margaret stood near the back, plate in hand, heart steady. People passed, waved, asked about the recipe. She didn't feel like she was waiting anymore. Not for an invitation. Not for forgiveness. Not for understanding. She had arrived. Fully. Freely. Hazel leaned over during dessert. So, you staying? Margaret looked around. This is home. You want to paint the spare room? I was hoping you'd ask. That night, she wrote one final note to herself. Dear me, you waited a long time for someone to give you permission. But you were always the one holding the key. You didn't lose them. They let go. And now, you let go too. Look at the life that opened. Well done. Love, me.